Okay, welcome back to how to build a project plan. This is tutorial number 2. In the first tutorial, we created the project plan and we added the summary level tasks that came from this work breakdown structure. There's another video clip you can go to, project planning with sticky notes, and it'll talk you through how to structure what your project's going to look like, the different components, and we're now then converting that into a Microsoft project plan. Alright, so we've added the summary level tasks. These were the brown stickies, if you recall. Under the brown stickies were yellow stickies. Those were the individual sub-deliverables. So for main system, there were 3 deliverables that were beneath it that make up the main system. What we're going to do is we're going to insert 3 rows here. You can simply highlight the row just below where you want to add your individual deliverables, and you click the insert button on your keyboard 1, 2, 3 times. Okay. All right. And the first item they had there was motherboard. Then there's the processor, and then there was flash memory. Okay. And just as you saw in the last tutorial how I indented all of the summary level tasks, we're going to go ahead and indent now the yellow stickies below main system, so that main system now becomes the roll-up for those items. They all belong to the main system. We'll do the same for the rest. 2, 3. And power has battery, solar cell, and motion charger. Okay. Again, highlight, indent. Okay, I'll go ahead and do the rest and we'll be right back in a moment. And we're back. So I've added all the sub-components for each of these summary level tasks. I think I may have indented this once too many because they should all line up correctly, and they don't. So I'm going to outdent these, and you should be able to do this with your project plan when you've completed adding the tasks. So now we're going to display all of them. We'll click on the cornerstone, click on view, outline, all subtasks, and everything pops up. Now, when you create a project plan with Microsoft Project, it automatically assigns a duration. The duration is going to be 1 day question mark. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to modify that, but we're not going to do that quite yet. The first thing we do is we don't touch the dependencies, we don't add the resources. We're going to create duration, we don't change the duration, we don't add the resources, we're going to add dependencies. Now this is where a sequence of events need to occur in the proper order. So for example, we're going to make believe that in this scenario the motherboard has to be built before you can build a processor, and the processor has to be built before you build the flash memory. That might be the case, I'm not sure, but that's not my forte. Okay, so we're going to highlight those 3 tasks, and we're going to go back to the task ribbon, schedule, grouping, and go to the link tasks button. You click that, and suddenly they're linked. Now, to show what they look like when they're linked, we're going to drag this bar back here, and you can see the tasks all appear here. The gray brackets are the summary level tasks, and the blue bubbles here are each of the individual subtasks. In this case, the dependencies you see appear right here. So what this is saying is that this task must begin and end before this task can start. This task must finish before this one can start. The relationship between these 2 tasks, or these 3 tasks, is called finish to start, which makes sense. So we're going to take a look at that for just a moment. This is very important to understand this piece of it. We're going to click on, double click on the task. You get the task information bar. Then we're going to go to predecessors. We're going to go to the processor. There aren't any predecessors to the first one because it's the first one. Okay, we're on processor, and you see the predecessor is task number 3, motherboard. And the type of relationship these have with each other is finish to start, as I mentioned earlier. Now, you may have a scenario where you can't begin the processor task for a week after the motherboard's done because you have to, let's say, order the processor. It's going to take a week to get there. So this is where you can add what's called a lag. There's a bit of a lag before the next one begins. Let's say if it's a week in Microsoft Project, a week is 5 days. We don't count weekends unless you do have a plan where you're working weekends, but for the most part, a week's 5 days. And we're going to click OK. You'll see that the finish to start relationship remains. They still remain linked to each other, but there's, once this particular item is done, we're going to wait a week before we start the next one. Okay, and that's how you create dependencies. Now we're going to go ahead and create dependencies for the remainder, and we're just going to make them very simple in order. Highlight, click, highlight, click. Okay, we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and you can see I simply just created dependencies for each of these subgroupings. They all follow each other in sequence. Now, it probably doesn't make sense to have all of this work happening at the same time between this date here and this date over here. We probably want to run them in sequence following each other. Now, that may or may not make sense depending on what the project is, but we'll pretend that in this scenario it does make sense. So, in other words, we're going to build motherboard, processor, and flash memory, and then after flash memory, we're going to start building the battery. So we're going to create a finish to start relationship between these two sections. What we're going to do is we're going to go over here. So battery is task number 7. The predecessor to the battery, the one that has to happen before it, is flash memory. That's number 5. We're going to put number 5 here as predecessor. When you look over here now, you see that they've moved over and these tasks follow. The same would be down here, just for the sake of showing you what it looks like. Motion charger is number 9. We'll say the motion charger has to happen before user interface. We'll type 9. Okay. You'll notice that the successor task automatically populates when you do that. You don't have to put both in. Okay, I'm going to fill the rest of them in, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I went ahead and linked up all these tasks. It's important to do as much linking as you possibly can. It doesn't always have to follow in a waterfall fashion. In fact, as much as you possibly can, it's good to do some work parallel. It'll save you time and get your product out the door faster if you do that. The way that you do that on your plan here is, let's say I want to run this work here in parallel with this work here, so that they're happening at the same time. They're not sort of happening what's called a waterfall format. I need to change the relationship between these two tasks. So let's go over to this task right here, which is called battery. Task information, predecessors, flash memory. Okay, the relationship we're going to change this to would be start to start. What that says now is that when I begin working on the flash memory, I can also begin working on the battery. The two can be worked on simultaneously. They don't really depend on each other. And so that's a relationship that you can use. It's a very common relationship. The most common is finish to start. Start to start is the next most common, commonly used one. Of course, the other alternatives you have would be finish to finish. It's obvious when this task finishes, this task should also be finishing, is what this is saying here. This is used occasionally. I wouldn't recommend using this unless you really know what you're doing and you're comfortable with it. And lastly, of course, there is start to finish. Very rarely used. You probably will never use it. Finish to start and start to start are probably the two that you use the most. Okay, we'll change this back to finish to start. Okay. So now we have created dependencies. You've understood. We've learned how to do a lag, and that is it for tutorial number 2. Come back for tutorial number 3, where we will finish up building this project plan.